Hello, all. Welcome back to Talking Out a Line. As you all know, our show is about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Today's episode is about film and DEIB, and we're having a conversation with Bangladeshi American director, producer, and writer Rubaiyat Hussain, who has made critically acclaimed films like Made in Bangladesh, Under Construction, and Meherjan.
Rubaiyat Hossain is a Bangladeshi-born filmmaker who found her passion early on in life. Due to the lack of film schools and lack of opportunity offered to her in Bangladesh, she ventured to New York Film Academy in order to study film. Alongside her film diploma, she gained a Bachelor of Arts degree in Smith College in Women's Studies and a Master of the Arts degree for South Asian Studies in the University of Pennsylvania. And finally, a Master's of Arts diploma from Tisch School of Arts and Cinema. She then returned to Dhaka, Bangladesh to pursue her passion.
Rubaiyat released her first full-length feature film, Meherjan, in 2011, a film that critiques the pitfalls of nationalism, such as war, killing, and violence. The success of this film helped kickstart her journey as an acclaimed filmmaker around the world. 4 years later, she released her second film, Under Construction, which is a film about a woman's journey in reclaiming her identity, her freedom, and her sexuality. Her latest film, Made in Bangladesh, premiered in the Toronto International Film Festival, which looks at the controversial fast fashion industry and of Bangladesh from the perspective of its women workers. Through her journey as a woman identifying filmmaker, she has battled many stereotypes and sexism in the film industry and overall in the workplace, which will be talked about in her interview with us, as well as many of her other accomplishments as a BIPOC filmmaker in Bangladesh, as well as the United States of America.
Kona Talkies, Rubaiyat's production house, focuses on finding new talent in the film industry and giving a voice to the silenced and marginalized. She also found her non-for-profit called Sultana's Dream to support aspiring Bangladeshi women filmmakers to find their platform to create their craft. Both these foundations work together, supporting women creators find their voice in their own craft in a male-dominated field.
As always, before we jump into the interview with Rubaiyat Hussain, let's look at some statistics on film and DEIB. There are less than 22% of women directors and 33% of women film writers, which obviously impact the way in which stories are written and multimedia is created, and what kind of women's stories get represented and told in media. Both male and female people of color represent 30% of directors and 32% of film writers. Just like the gender imbalance and its impacts on film narratives, the lack of BIPOC in directing and film writing impact the ways in which BIPOC and women identifying folks are represented and written about in all the media that we watch, starting from social media, from TV, from film.
Only half the people globally are satisfied with the level of representation they see in TV shows and movies. 79% of people said that more diversity is needed on screens. Women still only make up about 23% of creative team members in the 250 top grossing films. UK, the United Kingdom, shows that even though women make up to 53.7% of off-screen workforce, they represent only about 26.2% of directors.
Streaming platforms in 2020, films featuring casts that were 21% to 30% minority had the highest ratings amongst white, Black, Latino, and Asian households and viewers 18 to 49. So it is of the interest of filmmakers to increase diversity and representation in their narratives, because you will be able to capture a larger audience of people who would be interested in watching your craft. Women made up of 47.8% of lead actors and 41.3% of overall casts in the top films of 2020. So it's trying to move towards the direction of gender parity when it comes to representation of women in lead actors, but in this way, this in no way represents the percentage of BIPOC women representation in overall casts and lead actors, which are far behind in the diversity reports in Hollywood.
In the mid-2000s, 86% of top films featured white actors, and by 2015, only 5.2% of directors in the industry were Black. White directors made 89.3% of the 2,000 films that comprised of the 100 top grossing films in the past 2 decades. During 2019, older white men dominated the Academy Awards, which is 94% white, 77% men, and media age of 62.
Thank you so much for watching the intro for film and DEIB. We are very happy to have Rubaiyat Hussain with us. And tell us a little bit about your company, your projects, and your work historically and now.
Hi, Fadia. Well, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure. Like you said, I'm a screenwriter, producer, and director. And I write, direct, and produce films. And I have a company in Bangladesh called Kona Talkies, which I started in 2008 along with my partner. And we have been producing young talents from Bangladesh, and we have been trying to tell stories that are otherwise marginalized or silenced. For example, we have produced films about women, like survivors of sexual violence from 1971. Or we have produced films by indigenous directors. And I also have a company in the United States. And I also recently started Sultana's Dream. It's a foundation in Bangladesh. And what we are doing is we are mentoring young women between 15 and 30. And these women are learning the craft of short filmmaking. They're also going through some feminist study circles, cinema study circles. So they're equipped with a gendered lens, and they're politically conscious about what it means to represent something or somebody. And equipped with all of this, and they do also leadership workshops. So it's kind of not only filmmaking, there are many aspects to it. And after that, they get grants and they will make the short film. So as we speak, they're going to be pitching next week in front of a board of 5 jury members who are all women. And we had our mentors, where we also had a lot of mentors. So the idea was also to expose these women to other women who are in positions of power and decision making.
Oh, fantastic. So I would love our audience and I to know more about Sultana's Dream and how we can know more about it and support it and be part of it, because I'm sure there are many people watching this show that would be really interested in being in that environment of not only getting mentored but by being in front of people who are in positions of power, who would be able to greenlight and or help mentor projects. So that's wonderful. So tell us a little bit about the titles. So I know you gave us a bit of a summary about the movies that you did about sexual abuse survivors, for example, of the 1971 Bangladeshi war. Then what made me interested is also the stories and movies that you've produced in Bangladesh that had indigenous directors. So tell us a little bit more about the names and the titles and how your selection process goes of picking projects.
The film that I talked about, that's the narratives of these women who were survivors of sexual violence in 1971. These women have been shunned in society, even though they were, if you look at our national textbooks, they're called heroes of our glorious 1971 war. But in reality, these women were very much shunned and they were silenced. So the idea was to give them a space to speak. And the director's name is Farzana Bobby, and the film is called The Poison Thorn. So what Bobby did is, after research, she identified 4 women and she followed them and she spoke to them. And when we screened the film in Dhaka, we brought these women. So they were on stage and talking about it. So it was also to create a rupture within this masculine nationalist narrative that these voices exist. And use the medium of film to bring that forward. And then we worked with Ong Rakhine, who's coming from the Rakhine community in Bangladesh. And he had made a film called My Bicycle, which is a film made in Chakma language, and it's the first indigenous language film in Bangladesh. This film he did on his own, but we helped him to distribute it internationally and locally. And then we produced a short film from him called The Last Post Office, which screened at Locarno Festival. And it also screened in very prestigious short film festivals in France. And the film actually talks about two men in this ambiguous relationship working in a post office in an isolated part of Bangladesh. This is just like an example of the kind of films that we produce, but we also have, we have produced a film called Belonging about the Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. And then I myself have written and directed 3 films, Meherjan, which was released in 2010, and Under Construction, which was released in 2015, and Made in Bangladesh, which was released in 2019.
Fantastic. So all of this, I'm sure the audience would like to know where to go to find them. And our website for Talking Out a Line would have the links for everywhere you would have to go to find Rubaiyat's work. So here's the spirit of the show. So I started this show thinking about issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in different fields. So I wanted to ask you, being a woman of color filmmaker, being a historically marginalized group, for being behind the camera in making feature-length work, what would be your take on this world of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? First, from a Bangladeshi perspective, and then from a US perspective, since you are shuttling between 2 different countries.
Well, I think, historically, women have been underrepresented in cinema. Not in the sense that they're on the screen. We see them all the time. But they're not working as directors and producers and storytellers and decision makers. They're not behind the camera. They're always in front of the camera. Like historically, if you look at cinema and women. So I think women lack real agency in this field because of the way it's been built, how women's bodies are at the center of this erotic pleasure. And, the male gaze is what constructs even the idiom of cinema. Mm-hmm. So it's something that, it's not that women have not made films, like there are really important women filmmakers since the beginning of the history of cinema. For example, Dorothy Arzner, who's a woman from the early Hollywood period. She was making silent movies and she made the first docu for Paramount. And she was hugely successful. But these women have been kind of buried, and it takes a feminist historian to go back and unearth these women. Similarly, in like the beginning of French New Wave, you have Chantal Akerman, you have Agnes Varda, who are actually far ahead of even their male counterparts at their time. But somehow, like, their numbers are very few. It's not that women have not been there. They have been there. They have been producing really high quality cinema, but they have just been very, very outnumbered. And when you go to a set, when you want to go direct at a set, especially in Bangladesh, it's all male. If you look at a normal set, only the females are the actors. Otherwise, there are no women. So that's when I started doing this job, that's what shocked me. Because, I went to Smith, I came from this feminist background, and I worked with women's rights organizations in Bangladesh. So I was kind of used to being in an environment that was kind of balanced, And then I go to make movies and I'm like, wow, this is a different world because I'm the only woman in the room and I hate being the only woman in the room. And in Bangladesh, in the beginning, I'd go to meetings and people wouldn't even look me in the eye. They're just like totally try to ignore me, that she cannot be a director, because she doesn't look like what we understand as director, So it was really hard for me. And because it was so hard for me, I realized that there needs to be space, exclusive space for women to learn and grow and make films. That's what I take away from my own experience. And then I have a lot of experiences in Europe because my films have been co-produced with European countries, and that's actually my primary market. I have a larger market there than I have in the US or in Bangladesh. And even in a place like France, it's hard to find a very good woman producer. They're out there, but they're very few in numbers. You go to a European film market, you will meet maybe like 30% women. They're really pushing it very hard, like festivals like Berlinale and Venice and Cannes, they're really trying to push very hard to make like a 50-50. You know, they had this agenda 50-50 by 2020, which didn't happen. But at least now there's an awareness, you know.
Sounds great. So tell me a bit about what you just said, because I'm sure my audience, like me, I'm curious. Why is your main market Europe versus, say, Bangladesh and or the United States? What do you think it is about the work and the message that you convey through your work that makes the European market more of your market?
Because, you know, Europeans are very much used to watching subtitle films. And the US audience, unfortunately, still are not so used to watching subtitle films. Because in a country like France, every week they release like 10 foreign titles. So there is an audience there. In Bangladesh, when I release a film that doesn't really have stars or songs or dances, or, you know, it's not like a crowd-pleasing type of story, I don't draw a lot of audience. Maybe there's a...
I was not to make light of it, but I guess sexual abuse survivors is not a very crowd-pleasing story. And
no,
there is
and then, you know, like my last film was about a factory worker who's fighting to unionize her factory. So these are the kind of stories that start conversations in Bangladesh, and you know, they're shown in organizations like NGOs and universities, but when we're at the theater, it's not like we don't draw a huge amount of audience. But in places like France or Germany, or even like the film is doing really well in Japan. We had 49 theaters in Japan.
Fantastic. For Made in Bangladesh?
Yeah.
Wow, it's amazing.
Yeah, we released on 16th April and it's still running there, which is amazing. So, you know, I feel like, and for Made in Bangladesh, I had a French distributor, and they made it possible for me to like screen the film in all these different countries. It was released in Mexico, and, you know, it was like released in like a lot of, like a wide range of places that I couldn't have done myself.
Fantastic. So tell me this, since you have explained to us that a lot of the work that you're doing is from your identity perspective, you're historically marginalized in those workplaces. And secondly, the topics that you're dealing with are not, like you said, crowd pleasing, because they're not as popular because of the hard-hitting realities that you're doing interesting cinema and production work in. So was this a conscious choice? Did you want to be a trailblazer that works on issues that no one else works on? Or is it something that sort of happened along the way where life just took over?
No, I think it was very natural, you know, like I think that why would I want to tell a story that has already been told? You know, like what's the point in talking about something? Like, I think I always wanted to say something that needs to be said. Like, for example, like women and nationalism, you know, and like how, like in Bangladeshi context, women's sexuality and nationalism. I thought it was really urgent. So when I made Meherjan, I really try to talk about that, you know. And then for Under Construction, I felt that the modern Bangladeshi woman was facing this dilemma, which I was also facing, between the traditional role versus what you want to do, your individuality and family, your sexuality, pleasure, motherhood, you know. So I really wanted to talk about that. And I feel that when I make a film, it's also a creative journey. So I have an impulse to tell a certain story, but at the same time, I feel like now when I look at my films, I feel like through my film, I'm also trying to examine women in society. Because, you know, for an undergrad, I was a women's studies major, and that's really at the crux of what I do. So I think, you know, how in Under Construction, I look at a middle-class woman in Bangladesh. And then in Made in Bangladesh, I got to have a very close look at the working class woman. So I think it also helps me understand something that I'm trying to understand. When I make a film, I get very close to it.
Yeah, I watched all of your movies so far, the feature length, and I haven't watched the ones that you've produced on the indigenous community. And I'm really looking forward to watching those shorts, because I didn't even know that. I watched the stuff that you directed, but I haven't watched the stuff that you've produced. So I would be very interested in watching it. And I absolutely loved Made in Bangladesh. My husband and we watched it, and I have recommended it to endless places for screenings. So, so I think you spoke about this a little bit already, that what are the unique challenges that are presented in your workplace. So you've said that you have been in places where you have been completely treated without perhaps respect and or not knowing, because questioning your authority about being a woman in power, a woman in leadership, being a director, being a producer. And that even there's probably an ageism involved in that as well, because you're a young woman who is assuming the role of a producer and a director, while they're probably looking for an intersectional identity of a much older man. And so tell us, what are the ways in which you keep on continuing to overcome these issues with the work that you're doing? How easy is it for you to continue this work despite the discouragements or the barriers? And how do you actually succeed in doing that? Because I'm sure there are people here who are trying to break into the industry who would want to know your advice on that and the path to take for overcoming these issues.
I think, as women, we have to be, like, I think Spike Lee said this in his Oscar speech, that as a Black director, he had to be twice as good, So I think as women, we have to be like twice as good. First of all, you have to really know what you're talking about. Because if eventually when, maybe in the beginning, the crew would judge me or doubt me because, oh, she's a woman, she's young, maybe she doesn't know. But when I start doing my job, then people actually start listening to me, because they see that, oh, she knows what she's talking about. And especially a film set is, there's a different dynamic within a film set. It's, if you're doing your job well, I think your crew won't care if you're a man or a woman or a monkey. They will follow you if you're doing your job. But that's on the set. But we have to work a lot before we can get to the set. We have to write and finance and pitch and get a producer and go to the markets and do all of that. And I think that's where it's more difficult, because you're alone and you're like trying to like have a vision and you're trying to bring people on board, and you really have to put yourself out there despite of the doubts. Especially for me, I think I had to fight a lot in the process of writing, because I have self-doubt. And I think a lot of my creative self-doubt has to do with the fact that, I was raised in a certain way or raised in a certain society that made me feel that, these are not things that women do. Even I'm doing it, like maybe that message is still somewhere there in the back of my mind, which I have to fight. So I think, of course, there are structural issues, there are structural inequalities, but I think there are also a lot of, there are a lot of things that are kind of set within our, like the structure of our thoughts and our thinking and this reoccurring voice. So for me, I think that was really hard, that people would doubt me, that, oh, this script is not going to work out, this film is not going to work out. And I just have to keep at it. And I think you just have to keep at it and keep doing it and keep doing a really good job. And also I always look up to other women. I look up to like other women director, women screenwriter, and I study about them. I listen to their interviews. If I'm feeling down, I'd like listen to Gloria Steinem interview, So I think I resource myself too with other women who are strong.
Sounds good. No, because I feel like one of the goals that I have with this show is for people in similar fields to get inspiration from one another about how do you navigate these issues as they go forward. And believe it or not, all my guests have very similar answers. And it just shows me that when you have to get something done from a historically marginalized group, like the whole theme about what you said, that you have to be twice as good, that theme has come up in almost literally all of my conversations across industries. So it's hard to ignore the that so many people in so many different industries feel that same pressure. And us as a society in Bangladesh, in the United States, or anywhere really in the world, really have to wake up to the systemic problems that we have created, rather than thinking that when these situations of marginalization happen, that it is this unique bad experience. It's not a unique bad experience. It is a systemic pattern that has been established, and the hegemony is maintained by people wanting to maintain imbalanced power structures that serve certain people. So we as a society need to wake up to that idea of women not having to work twice as hard, and women just having their ability to do what they want to do, to chart their paths without feeling the pressure of what you just said, and how that impacts sort of your creative process. Well, I want to know more going forward about your projects coming up. So tell us a little bit about all. I know you've told us that you've just launched about Sultana's Dream, which the audience would like to know more about. But in general, your creative work, your plans. Tell us more about what's going on with you.
Sultana's Dream is actually what's really kept me busy. I'd like to share more about that, but let me just tell you also that I finished a script, which is in financing now. And it's probably the hardest script that I wrote so far in my life.
Are we allowed to know a little bit about it?
Yeah, the film is called The Difficult Bride. And it's about a woman in her late 20s in Bangladesh who's getting married, and she's frequenting the beauty salon. And a lot of the film is set in that universe, and it's really about how femininity is constructed. And, the film goes into a supernatural space where her body starts to reject these treatments. And the body kind of becomes it gains its own agency, it doesn't want to comply. So there's a real fight within that woman. So the film is really about that fight within, the fight that I was talking about that happens in our head. And the project was part of a Berlinale co-production market earlier this year, where we had a lot of interest from the industry. So now I have sent the script out into the world. So we'll see what happens. If everything works out, hopefully we'll be filming it next year. And I'm producing a debut feature from Bangladesh called Sand City. And we have received financing for this from Switzerland, and we also have some local money. So we're going to be starting filming that hopefully in December, January.
And that one is about the indigenous group in Bangladesh, correct?
No, this is another film. This is a film about, it's urban story. There are 3 different characters in the film that we follow. It's by a young director. His name is Mahdi Hassan, and he's very talented. So we're producing his first feature. Fantastic. And because, there are a lot of creative talents in Bangladesh, and I really feel like I want to see more movies get made that have really, really good visual language, and, it could be distributed globally. And so I'm just trying to do that, but it's not easy. And with Sultana's Dream, we started with inviting applications from women, and we put an age restriction that you have to be between 15 and 30. And we selected 16 projects. We started with 16 individuals. And we took them through modules of, screenwriting, cinematography, sound, recording, editing, production design, pitching, how to prepare a grant application. We also put them through feminist study circles with academics, and we have arranged for them leadership workshop, because directing is a leadership position and women are not raised as leaders. So they get leadership workshop and then they finally pitch. And two of these women will receive their grants, and then they will make their short films. So this is also an experiment to see that, okay, these women wanted to make movies, but they did not know how to make films. And if you put them through this program, can they come out with good projects? We have to see. It's an experiment. I don't know what's going to happen. We're going to see what happens. We're going to hopefully have the film ready by the end of the year. And Sultana's Dream also came out of all of my experiences, because, when I travel to festivals, a lot of people ask me, oh, why are you the only woman director from Bangladesh? Why aren't there other women in Bangladesh who are making films? And I think that, I had a lot of privileges, and I acknowledge that. I was able to come to the United States and study at Smith College, and, my parents were able to buy me a small camera for my graduation present. I could afford to go to New York Film Academy. I had certain privileges, which a lot of women might not have access to. I had a family that supported me, a partner who supported me. And I feel like I want to give back. And I also feel like this is why we don't have enough women directors, because women need a lot of privileges to make movies, which they're not granted. For example, in Bangladesh, we don't have a film school. So most of the learning is informal and happens through peer groups. So women don't have access to these peer groups. And these groups and the film sets are highly misogynist and sexist environment. So it's not easy for a woman to break into that. Women also have a mobility, issues of mobility in Bangladesh. They cannot go out. They cannot stay out overnight. They also don't have access to money. So that's why I felt that, okay, they need this program. And doing the program, I realized that, the program is appropriate from any country, not only Bangladesh, because even in a place like United States, women are not raised as leaders. Women are not, we don't see, if you look at Hollywood, how many women directors do you see? And the way women are represented is in cinema. So I feel like we not only need women directors, but we need women directors who are politically conscious.
Absolutely. And who can own and understand the whole process of representation, as you said. That's so much of, so I'm in the field of media and communication through my teaching and through my writing. And that's one of the main things I teach is representation. When I do introduction to media courses or introduction to communication or upper level courses that are more specialized, the concept of representation and construction of identity and the power that media has to exaggerate that and to amplify that. If you don't know the consequence of that, it doesn't make us responsible makers. In fact, I feel that makes us part of a bigger problem, that on one hand, media is so powerful because it has the power to spread and amplify, and it becomes so much more important for makers to understand their own power in representation. So yeah, so that is fantastic that your mentorship program is, like you said, it's not just like, let's learn how to edit, let's learn how to write, let's learn about how content creation happens and what is responsible content creation. And those conversations are so important to have. And yeah, so it looks like your project is doing really a good job, and it must be taking a whole chunk of your time. Essentially, you're starting your own film academy. That's what you're doing, it sounds like.
We'll see. This thing came about during the pandemic.
Well, it's good that you did, because it's basically like your own film academy.
And I have to thank all the mentors, because what I did in making Sultana's Dream is I used all the connections that I'd made in like past 15 years of making films and working in the industry, So, through the process, I've met great women who are producers or screenwriters and critiques. So I kind of brought everybody together, and it's really worked out, but we have to still see. We have to see how the films turn out. But I totally agree with what you said, Fadia, that I do feel that oftentimes directors might not, like they're not responsible. Sometimes they don't understand that there are consequences to the way they represent.
Absolutely. And it can be dangerous, Rubaiyat.
It's so dangerous, especially, in terms of there's correlation to the way women are portrayed in Bollywood cinema and the rise of sexual violence against women in India, and horrific violence on women's bodies, So I think it's really about time that we start talking about it, but it's so hard to talk about it because you see billions of dollars kind of ride on these women's bodies. These images, like the Bollywood images of these women, their box office depends on it, So it's something that people within the film industry, I think this is like a topic that people really don't want to talk about. If you talk about it too much,
it goes against the financial benefits and the returns and the dividends that
and if you talk about it too much, then you're uncool, or you're like this feminist bitch, or you're annoying, even in very prestigious European festivals, it's all about brands and red carpets and the way women carry themselves. Why is that so important? Why is that so important? And why aren't we talking about it,
Absolutely. And one of the things that I really appreciated about your feature-length films so far is that, and that is huge for me as a media and communication trained person, as well as just a regular viewer of media, which is that your movies have talked about serious topics, but they don't look like serious movies. And that to me is huge, meaning what, and I'll explain to the audience what I mean by that. A lot of times when filmmakers are making movies on hard-hitting topics, like say labor unions in Bangladesh, when I watched Made in Bangladesh, it was a very serious topic, but I felt like I watched cinema that is entertaining, that has a narrative, that has characters that I'm looking forward to, that is not just a documentary type approach. It was a movie with a heart and a soul, with characters that happened to be about a very important reality, economic reality that the whole global world has to deal with, because Bangladesh happens to be I believe, the second largest exporter of garments in the world. So same with Meherjan, your first movie, you dealt with such an important topic. However, it felt cinematized, and it felt like, and then there was magical realism thrown into it. And I loved that angle. And really, I thought that that's what I find so interesting about your style of filmmaking, is that you talk about important things, but you talk about it in a way which gives the viewer a more cinematic experience, which is a few filmmakers in my books are trying that approach, because I feel like it's easier to find filmmakers who's like making mindless movies and the ones that are serious filmmakers. But I feel like your style has a creative balance between talking about things that are hard-hitting yet having an entertainment value to it, which I appreciate as an audience. So what I wanted to also sort of end the show with is some light questions about your recommendations as a filmmaker of other people's work. What gets you interested in on TV or on films? Any recommendations of peer work or anything you're watching these days that you'd really want the audience to think about, either as a good or a bad example of the issues we were talking about, like representation, women's bodies, agency, anything that comes to your mind as our audience would like to know more about a filmmaker's perspective on other people's work?
I really enjoy watching works of Ava DuVernay. And what she's doing with the stories that she's telling, I think that's amazing.
Give us some names of the products.
Ava DuVernay has this great show on Netflix called When They See Us.
Okay.
And it's about these 5 young African-American men who were convicted for rape in Central Park.
Don't know about it. I'm going to definitely go and look at it.
Yeah. And then, directors like Barry Jenkins, who's made Moonlight, and he has a show on Amazon called Underground Railroad.
Yep.
And I feel like because we have these Black directors telling these stories, we know these stories. We did not know these stories before.
No. And this is something that I'm trying to bring up in my classes, that so much of our so as Bangladeshi background people and brown communities, so much of brown communities' knowledge about Black communities come from white communities. So we learn about other historically marginalized groups from the lens of white writers, white makers, white readers. So it's really important for us to understand that who you are in your identity, and that having the power to make something that is out for the world, to speak about your own community, is a really powerful thing that we didn't have the privilege of historically for so many years.
Yeah, because, we all know about the Underground Railroad, but when you see Barry Jenkins' show, you really feel the horror of it.
Yep.
It's difficult to even watch, but I appreciate that he's made this. He's made this, and we can try to at least begin to try to understand it.
Yeah, well, my wish list for you, Rubaiyat, is going to be, because I have been lately thinking about, so I'm really interested in food, and actually one of the episodes of Talking Out of Line is on food and diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And one of my dream projects going forward is to figure out ways in which food cultures in around the world in the global south has been impacted by other global south cultures, as a way of how colonialization and imperialism has sort of moved us and made us work together, Black and brown communities across the world. So, and how that has impacted what we eat and what we cook, and the food that we share that we don't know, that has happened as a result of all of these networks of sort of the power networks that have brought us together in different parts as slaves, as coolies in different parts of the world. So my wish list for you as a fan, and as well as a person who as a media maker, would be to see if filmmakers of your background can find ways of collaborating with Black filmmakers to—
I would love that.
To create narratives of Black and brown media projects. And I'll give you an example. There is a TV show that I really like watching called Evil. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's really interesting. I would highly recommend it. And I would actually like to know your perspective on it from a filmmaker perspective. It's one of the few shows that has three lead characters. One of them is a white woman, one of them is a Black male, and one of them is a South Asian male. And it is so interesting for me to see the ways in which the Black male and the brown South Asian male are interacting with one another, because in so few places in the media that we consume do we ever see Black and brown communities become friends or have any interaction for us to look up to. We only see, whenever we see inclusion, we always see inclusion mediated by white voices. We see a white person in a relationship with a Black person or a brown person. We never really see, there isn't so much narratives of Black and brown and what happens when they come together. So my wish list for you would be to work on projects of diverse global South voices, because that would be, with your focus and your interests in talking about things that are more marginalized that others don't talk about, I think you would be the right filmmaker to be making a movie on that.
Well, I was thinking about Mississippi Masala.
Exactly. That was pretty much the last one that
that was like
so long ago.
1991.
Exactly.
But that's a great example of what you're talking about.
And the filmmaker, I believe, is Mira
Nair.
And Mira Nair is, I believe, is or was married to an African man, correct?
She is, and now she runs a film school in Africa.
Oh, that's amazing. So
she runs a film institute. So she is really doing that. And her latest movie, which was Queen of Katwe.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet.
You have to see it. So that's another recommendation. She filmed it in Africa, and a lot of the crew and the actors in the film were her students from the institute.
Oh, fantastic! So I have a
and Mira Nair is actually somebody that I really admire. I really look up to. I was in a workshop with her in 2019 Cannes, and I just admire her strength and her power. And when she's in a room, she's a real powerhouse,
Yeah,
so there's examples of that.
Yeah, she's a role model for sure. So anyway, so that was sort of amazing. I think our audience will really enjoy listening to not only your own work, all the amazing things that you just highlighted that you've done in the past and continuing to do. And I would love to know sort of about the outcomes of Sultana's Dream. And I will be in touch about that, because totally interested in knowing where that experiment goes, and what an amazing opportunity for budding filmmakers. And thank you again for your recommendations as well. And looking forward to seeing more of your work out in this world, so that our audience and I can go see more of it and have it with, I don't really like popcorn, so I'll have it with something I like. So yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.